the City of Newburgh Rate Review Committee meeting for February 24th, 2026. Natalie, can you please conduct roll call?
Yes. Do we have Derek Worf? Enan Burkle? Mary Meyer? Leisha Adams?
Here.
Derek Duff?
Here.
Ned Knight?
Here.
Ron Sinicki?
Here.
Roger Coleman?
Here.
And Raquel Peregrino de Brito? And Peggy Kilbert. Thank you.
Okay, Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'll now open the floor to general public comment. Natalie, did we receive any public comments?
No public comments.
Okay, I'll now close the public comment session, the first public comment session. Now open the public hearing for the Rate Review Town Hall. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to submit testimony concerning the proposed rate increases for 2027 and 2028. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest before we get going? Okay, assuming none, I'll now turn over the presentations to city staff.
And to Deb.
Okay. Deb Gallardi, Gallardi Rothstein Group. I'm the consultant that assisted the city on this rate review update. And let's see, who's driving? Got some slides to share. Oh. So. We could deal with that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the rate review process includes evaluating the financial plans and rates for 4 different infrastructure systems: sewer, which we also refer to as wastewater, water, stormwater, and transportation. We go through the same process for each system, which starts with identifying the financial needs. Financial needs include capital improvements, the infrastructure itself and improvements to that, debt service, both existing debt service on prior investments as well as future debt service used to pay for some of the larger capital improvements. The operation and maintenance costs of the systems, the staff, the materials and services, those sorts of costs ongoing to operate, maintain. And then contingencies and reserves, which are in some cases required by lending agencies and are just part of prudent financial planning and holding reserves for cash flow purposes and for future capital improvements. The next step is to evaluate the revenue sources that are available to fund the improvements. So this includes current rate revenue, as well as in some cases, reserves and new development charges, which we call systems development charges. Some of the systems have special fees and services that also produce revenue that are available to fund a portion of the system. Once we consider the financial needs and we evaluate the revenue sources, then we determine what type of rate increases are needed to pay for the improvements over the planning period. And this rate setting considers a 2-year period where the committee makes recommendations. However, we look at a longer term plan, 5 to 10 years, so that decisions made today, we keep the longer term view, because some of the larger capital improvements occur later in the plan, and it's necessary to build reserves so that future rate increases can be smoothed. Okay, next slide. Or next page, I guess. Okay, great. So just to understand that it's really critical to understand that these are enterprise funds in the city, which means they basically need to be, the expenses need to be covered by revenues generated within the system. They do not rely on taxes or other general fund revenues. They rely specifically on user rates and other fees and charges. Next slide, please. Just to provide a little bit of a national perspective, that the rate increases faced by utility agencies have, over the last couple of decades, increased about 2 times the rate of inflation. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that there is a backlog of capital improvements that are needed for all of our infrastructure systems. So inflation just takes care of, an inflationary increase would basically just maintain the same kind of purchasing power as costs increase. But we have additional needs that aren't currently being covered. So we have to add on to the rate increases to expand the ability of the rates to pay for that backlog of improvements, as well as regulatory requirements and other, system expansion, those sorts of things. Just major system replacement, a lot of capital needs that are driving the rate increases. The other thing is that the consumer price index, which we all a lot think about in terms of inflation, it does not accurately capture the type of expenses faced by the utilities. Concrete and other building materials are not accurately captured in a CPI kind of inflation increase. And so the 5 to 6% average per year increase in water and sewer bills that we tend to see across the country is more representative of the specific cost increases related to capital improvements, as well as the fact that current rates aren't paying sufficiently to replace the aging infrastructure. Next slide. Finally, just in terms of the general approach that we use in determining the financial needs, a lot of this comes out of the city's budget process. Basically lays the foundation for the operation and maintenance, staffing, and other costs that are needed for each system. We consider economic factors like inflation and system growth, and because growth in customers generates additional revenue through the utility fees as well as systems development charges. And then, of course, the existing debt from the prior investments, which are generally paid off over a 20, and some cases 30-year period. Okay, next slide. All right, so we'll get into each system, starting with the wastewater system. So we'll start just kind of with a overview of what the main issues are and what the revenue covers currently. Sewer rates or wastewater rates currently fund about $11 million, generate about $11 million in revenue. The 2-year rate plan recommendations are needed to address general inflation, and that's obviously applies to all the systems. The city, in operating the systems, experiences inflation as businesses and homeowners do as well. And so some of the rate increases just to keep pace with inflation. But then there's the supporting the additional capital expenditures that are needed. For sewer, there is a major capital improvement needed in the next few years for the wastewater treatment system. And that totals about $35 million, more than 3 times as much as the current revenue generates. So obviously there's going to need to be some one-time revenues applied to that project in order to make it, make the city ability to pay for that. So luckily, there are existing cash reserves. The committee and the city have proactively prepared for this large capital expenditure. And part of the prior rate increases have been to build cash reserves to make those available to fund large capital expenses. So about half, well, a little less than half of the project will be funded by the current reserves. Another 15 million will be funded by reserves in the Systems Development Charge Fund. But that still won't cover the total amount of the project. So the recommendation is to use a 10-year loan from the Water Fund, where there are also reserves. The city can do this under Oregon budget law, can loan money from one fund to the other as long as they pay it back, and pay it back with some interest. But keeping interest through an internal loan is a lot more cost effective than paying interest to an external lending agency. So rate increases are needed to pay for capital improvements and inflation. If we go to the next page, you'll see the 5-year capital improvement plan. The wastewater treatment plant project, again, is the largest component of this, $38 million roughly in capital improvements over the next 5 years. The oxidation ditch is the treatment project at the bottom there. There are also significant expenses related to managing and reducing infiltration and inflow, which is additional flow that gets into the wastewater system that the treatment plant and the pump stations and infrastructure has to then manage. And the city can talk more about that if people have specific questions on the nature of some of these projects. But that the oxidation ditch treatment improvement, as well as this inflow and infiltration investment, are the two primary projects there. Next slide.
Yep, really quick question.
Yes.
The oxidation ditch for 32.5 million.
Mhm.
Is that the same as the prior slide that said 35 million?
Yeah, I think one is inflation adjusted and other is not. So yeah, yeah, it's the same project. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, please. Yeah, jump in anytime, Will.
The thing about that is if we can get it done quickly, it'll be closer to the one number, not the other. So we have to move very, very quickly to do this and try and keep the cost down.
Okay, so this slide shows each of the bars represents the components of the revenue requirements for each year in this 5-year period. Again, we're just looking at the next 2 years for the rate increase recommendation, but we want to make sure that we don't miss something on the horizon that we also need to be planning for in the short term. So there is some amount of debt reduction that occurs during the 5-year window, meaning that some of the existing debt drops off. It's just a little under $500,000, so it's not a significant amount, but that does create some capacity within the current rates to pay for the new debt service associated with the water loan, or just some of that ongoing I&I or other capital improvements. So the blue line in this chart shows the very steep decline in reserves. So right now, the reserves exceed, are about $20 million. And again, that's as a result of deliberate planning over the years to build cash to fund a large capital improvement and not have to go outside to do significant amount of borrowing, which adds to the long-term cost of the capital improvements. But as I mentioned, with this $35 million project, it's going to require utilizing the majority of those reserves to keep the rate increase to a minimum. So right now, in this scenario, the yellow line is where the arrow is pointing. That's the rate increase based on a 4.1% per year increase in rates. And you can see that that line increases, but is still below the expenditures in every year of this forecast. And that's why the blue line, which is the reserves, is dropping in every year. So basically, you'll be relying on reserves to fund a portion of the capital and other improvements in this planning period, but that helps to keep the rate increase to a minimum. By the end of the 5-year period, the reserve gets down to what we consider to be a minimum amount, the floor here. And so there really isn't the ability to buy down the rate increase further. And in fact, it's something to be mindful of as you consider the rate increases in the next 2-year period. Should there be a need to, on the horizon, a larger capital improvement appear, that you no longer will have the flexibility of those reserves to fund that. So it's always a balance of affordability, keeping the rate increase low, applying whatever revenue we have outside of rates to minimize the rate increases. But in doing so, we increase the risk in the short term and in the longer term that there will have to have a higher rate increase to add to those reserves later or meet some large capital improvement project. Is there, yeah, so there's a couple.
I have a question for Will. Is there anything out there in the 5 to 10 year look that might be in something that needs to be considered?
There is nothing of these magnitudes in the 5 to 10 year horizon that we know of. If something doesn't blow up, right?
Yeah.
So
The state mandates.
we don't, unless this, correct, Katie, unless the state comes up with some new stupid idea. So if this amount of reserve wouldn't normally be great, and I'd be uncomfortable with this, but we do know that the oxidation ditch reform, including adding a third oxidation ditch, more static piles, an extra clarifier, this gets us through to the 2040 timeframe based on our current population growth. With that in mind, and with nothing else gigantic in that horizon, we know we've got time to recover reserves from this action. This rate also has some money in it to help get that sewer surcharge and sewage spill dealt with through some extra I&I work.
Can I ask, on this graph, we show the current reserves, the beginning fund balance is starting at about 20 million. But on the prior slide, it said that there is 14 million of existing cash reserves in the sewer fund. So where's that extra 6 million? Is that presuming the loan from the water fund, or?
So the 20 million is what exists today. 14 million of that is assumed to be applied to the project. So you can see that, we still end up at the end with about $6 million left. So we're saying we're not drawing it down completely because we need to have some contingency and flexibility in the future. But a good portion of it is going to go to this oxidation ditch project.
Yeah, I probably didn't ask my question very well. I'm just wondering what funds reach that 20 million? What is that 20 million composed of? Because we're saying 14 million of cash reserves exist in the sewer fund. There's 15 million in the SDC fund, and then the 6 million that we would borrow from the water fund. So I'm just, sorry, I'm just wondering where the 20 million, how we got to 20 million.
That's what's in the bank today. Or no, just for sewer, just for sewer. Yeah, that's just looking at sewer. The bullets on the prior page is just the funding, the major funding sources for the $35 million capital project. And
Yeah.
so one thing to note, without getting too detailed into the city's budget, but there's an operating fund and a capital fund. This is showing you the balance in the operating fund. And so it's not showing you in that 1 year where the bar goes way up and so part of that middle year is fiscal year 27, 28. Part of what's happening there is that's where the additional revenue from the water fund loan is coming to offset some of those expenses as well as the SDCs. But you're not seeing that cash flow as part of this because they're in different funds. So, yeah, go ahead.
So, sorry. just
Another
so- can I
another way to
just-
think about this
Yeah.
is that we're transferring from the main fund
Yeah.
to the capital fund where the work actually happens.
Mhm.
And also in that fund, system development charges will be transferred. And
Yes.
also in that fund, our water loan will be transferred as we build the project as quickly as we can.
Okay, so with the 20 million, of that 20 million, 14 is reserves and 6 million is operating costs. Or sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the 20 million.
Yeah, the 20 million, to think about it as it's the cash in the bank today. And we're just saying that over the next few years, that's going to drop by 14 million to fund this. And it's going to go out of the operating fund in the form of capital transfers to that other fund that's accumulating all the money needed to pay the 35 million plus the other capital improvements.
The CIP building bucket.
Yes.
Yeah, and the 20 million is what we have in there today, and we don't want to use all that 20 million because we have people to pay, we have regular maintenance expenses, the I&I, so we have to have some sort of level of, money in there still to continue operations, if that makes sense.
Yes, that is.
Perfect.
Great question. Sorry, it took us a while to get there. Okay, the next slide then just shows the current sewer rates and the rates with the 4.1% applied across the board to all the rate components and all the rate classes. So the rates have two components, a service charge and a volumetric charge. The service charge does not vary by customer each month. It's just a flat charge per month. And that is $33.63 currently. That would increase to $36.44 by the end of the 2-year period. And then the volumetric charge varies by, the charge itself, the rate is $10.95 if you're a single family resident. But that bill component, so that rate gets applied to your winter average water consumption as measured in 100 cubic feet or CCF, and that determines your volume charge on your bill. So that component of the bill will fluctuate depending on how much water you use on average during the winter. And that's a way to scale the bills so that people who are discharging the most and using the most water will pay more than somebody who's using less. Okay, so for each of these systems, I will just show you a bill comparison for a residential customer. It's really important, this is, people always ask and want to know, how do we compare? And the difficult thing is it's difficult to compare apples to apples with other communities. A couple of major factors. One is that many of the cities that are shown in this comparison on the lower end are part of regional wastewater systems where it's just costs less if you're part of a big system and you benefit from the economies of scale. Bigger systems tend to, you can absorb the costs, spread it around a larger base. So there are at least half a dozen of the systems to the left of the yellow bar, which is the Newburgh rate, that are part of regional systems. That is not the case for the top communities, Philomath, Newburgh, Lake Oswego, Tillamook, Carlton, individual systems, mostly smaller cities, where the costs are higher per customer. And the other thing is, this is a snapshot in time. So what you don't see from this is like the city of Sandy is under a consent decree with the Department of Environmental Quality to do very significant improvements to their wastewater treatment system. They are projecting 10 to 15% per year rate increases over the next 10 years. So when you look at this 2 years from now, my guess is Sandy's going to be to the right of Newburgh. So we're basically saying you can take on this major capital improvement project. The cost is going to be a significant drop in your reserves, but you can basically finance it internally within the city and have a rate increase that's just a little bit above inflation. Whereas some of these other systems are facing major improvements and will be seeing much higher rate increases in the future.
And the other thing is that thanks to us having had the discipline to save up the money for this, when the system is built, we will then have the time to retire our debt component, which is in here. That will also have a positive effect on moving us further to the left on this chart, although we're never going to compete with clean water services cities.
Okay, I'll just move into the next system unless the committee has any other clarifying questions, and then I think we'll have a discussion at the end.
Could I ask a question about
Please.
sewer? When we're talking about the multifamily rate, that is specific, that is differentiated based on volume charge. Is there a difference in service charge for multifamily dwellings like apartment complexes?
Every account pays the same service charge in terms of that $33.63. For multifamily, there's an additional charge per unit that is $26.41 after the first unit. That is to pay for a portion of the infiltration and inflow projects and costs associated with that, handling the significant costs associated with the capacity to treat I&I and some of the mitigation, the capital improvements to mitigate I&I in the future. Yes.
And am I understanding correctly that it would, like currently is the $26.41 per additional family dwelling unit? So an apartment complex of 100 units would be paying $264.10. Okay.
Correct.
Plus $33.63 as just the base fee.
Yeah, that's just for the first unit.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll move into the water system. The water system also has a significant capital improvement project that we are planning around, but unlike sewer, it's at the end of the 10-year plan rather than being in the next few years. So that creates an opportunity to do that loan from the water system to the sewer system because the money that the water system has in reserves is not needed right now to address those capital improvements specifically. So in this case, there are some capital improvements, though, driven by state regulations primarily, that the city has to do in the short term. And so there will be needed some cash reserves spent on those improvements. And systems development charges also accrue to the water system and are being used currently to help retire some of the existing debt because there were improvements made for some expansion of the system. And so the SDCs help make sure that the growth pays for that, and that doesn't have to be part of the rate increases. The big thing for the water system is the new water treatment plant that is needed, but that is projected to be later in the construction in 23 to 2035 period. The current revenue from water rates is about $8 million. And of that, about $1 million goes to capital improvements. Okay, let's go to the 10-year capital improvement. So because we're planning for this big project, we need to look out at over the 10 years. And you can see in this table, the water plant, they're out a ways. So $45 million is what is estimated for that new plant. In the near term, we have House Bill 2001 state requirements. The city made the city have to upsize some of its water existing water mains and create some additional fire flow capacity in the system. And the remaining cost of that within the 5-year period is about $6.6 million. And then there are just some other less significant, routine replacement of pipes and other smaller capital improvements. Next slide, please.
We'll be back in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next slide will show the same chart that we were looking at for sewer with the comparing expenses to revenues and reserves. And here you can see in year 2, which is fiscal year 2027, the water loan is part of that big capital transfer. So it's not a transfer to within the water fund, but it's going out to the sewer fund. The rate increase that is included in the revenue projections here is 5%. There is some small debt reduction within the plan in 29-30, but that is only about $150,000. The sewer loan, as I said, will be paid off over the 10-year period so that we will, the reserves will be brought back up a bit in order to apply to the large water treatment plant project at the end of the period. The balance of the treatment plant costs, we're talking about a $45 million improvement here. And we don't have as much in reserves as was the case on sewer. So a water rate increase is needed to offset some of those costs and pay for the HB 2001 improvements that are needed in short term. And the recommendation then is that the balance of the water treatment plant costs, about $32 million is estimated, will be funded by a property tax supported bond. That is what is assumed here. Without a property tax supported bond, the rate increase would need to be significantly higher. Okay. This slide just shows then the water rates. Like the sewer rates, the water rates include a fixed charge per month. In this case, it varies based on the size of the meter, the water meter. So if you have a larger water meter, you're paying more per month. And if you have a smaller meter, you're paying you're paying $22.22 plus a billing charge, which is just under $4. And the volumetric rate then varies by customer class and applies to each unit of consumption for a customer. A typical residential bill is $60.22 currently. The next slide shows the comparison, the same communities. And the Newburgh rate is closer to the center of this comparison. We have the same situation here, though, where some of these other cities are part of larger systems. But, in the middle of the pack is basically the $50 to $65 per month kind of range. Yeah.
Question, why is there a separate billing charge? The other
Yeah.
utilities do not seem to have that.
Well, it's broken out like that because it doesn't scale with the meter size. It's just, it doesn't really cost the city more to send out a bill if you have a 5/8 inch meter or a 10-inch meter. So that's just capturing what the cost is for basic customer service and sending out a bill. The meter charge is more like a capacity charge in that we're recovering the costs, some of the costs associated with, it's kind of a readiness to serve charge. And because such a large portion of the costs are fixed, they don't vary with the volume. And so, but that scales with the meter size because in a readiness to serve element, which includes costs associated with like firefighting capacity within the system. We have to build the system larger so that there's pressure to provide sufficient flow for fire flow. And so a larger customer with a larger meter is going to be an industrial or institutional customer that requires more fire flow capacity. So that's partly why that scales, and the meter, the customer or the billing charge doesn't.
Can we talk about the bond for a minute?
Sure. Yes, please.
So the other thing about how do we pay for something that a few years ago was estimated to be $21.5 million, and now we think it will be 45 or maybe $50 million? How do you pay for that? So if the bond doesn't work, then the city will enter a crisis and we will take drastic steps to curtail irrigation and other steps that will happen during the summer. And then people will realize that it's not a joke and it's very serious. I hope that doesn't happen, but that's what will happen if we find ourselves in the situation where the attempt to get that balance of funds isn't met in that way. And then the other thing about this to think about is, as we go down this pipeline, obviously we're guessing the cost will be something of that region. We're hoping things have now stabilized at some kind of new normal, but who knows? I mean, the big developers, their expenses have increased and it's been this ongoing battle.
So are you saying that we're going to have a bond at some point too, in addition to the rate increases? Okay, that's not been mentioned in this, has it? Okay, thank you.
Because the alternative is to take out a huge loan again and pay even more for the balance to get to the number you need to build the water plant. Because this summer, for clarity, we were running at 4.1 megagallons per day. The current plant cannot manufacture more than about 5.5, 5.6 with people working flat out. It's just a capacity thing. So we're going to hit the number next decade. We're trying to get ready for it. I wish this fund had the kind of cash reserves that wastewater had on hand. I also wish the state hadn't stuck us with a disgusting unfunded mandate in the form of HB 2001, which is making us spend money that could have been used towards the water plant.
Clarity, the bond that we're talking about would be a property tax bond that would go out to the voters. So it would be something voted on by the residents. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to stormwater. Stormwater is luckily not facing the significant improvements that water and wastewater are. However, it's a much newer utility and rate, and so it's also not generating the revenue that those systems are. So the current rate revenue is about 3 million. Water was 8 million, sewers 11 million. And about 750,000 each year goes to capital outlay. A lot of that is just kind of ongoing vehicle equipment, system repair, replacement, kind of minor capital improvements. And the balance goes to funding the operation and maintenance. Like all the systems, we have to plan for inflation and support additional capital funding, which is estimated to average about $1 million per year. Full funding of near-term capital improvement plan, about $3 million, will rely, again, this is a common theme of using in the short term the reserves to fund some of the upfront costs and then phasing in rate increases to help increase the capital component of the rates, but also to keep pace with the inflation on operation and maintenance costs as well. So if we look at the next slide, we're looking at much smaller numbers. We're not looking at tens of millions of dollars. We're looking at a total estimated capital improvement plan over the next 5 years of about $6 million. Pipe replacement and some master planning work in this. There are some identified projects in this plan, but there are also placeholder projects where we know, like, the master plan is going to identify where the near-term priorities are. And so at this point, we have not designated a specific project, but we have designated specific funds. If we go to the next slide, you see our chart over the next 10 years. Again, looking at the fund balance reserves. In this case, the fund balance and reserves is the black line. We have much less in reserves than either of the water and wastewater system. But the revenues, the yellow line, because we don't have as much in reserves, we need to increase the rates to pay for the projected costs, because we apply some of the reserves up front to the short-term projects, and then it's a matter of just matching the rate increase to the projected costs. The good news is the prior rate cycle had projected the need for a 6.5% rate increase throughout the planning period, and that has been reduced to 4.5% based on further evaluation of the capital improvement costs and needs, and balancing considerations with the other systems as well. Yeah, Will.
Another factor in this turning down of what we were going to ask for this rate is the fact that market forces are currently in our favor if it's a simple pipe project. So we've been getting things under budget lately if it's not complex, not like a sewer plant or a water plant, but just a regular pipe run. Things like that Franklin stormwater line that I talked about before, which came in under budget, which was positive. And we're thinking that this intense competition for simple pipe projects is looking to continue through this year and into next year. So we'd like to get as much of these jobs done as we can while it's very competitive.
Okay, the rate structure for stormwater is much more simple than the others. It is a flat charge for single-family residential, just over $19 currently, and with the 4.5% rate increase, it increases to close to 20, and then just under 21 in the second year. Non-residential pays on an equivalent dwelling unit basis, which is based on the impervious area of each individual customer. All right, then we've got the rate comparison again. This just shows that. The same applies here with respect to the Clean Water Services that was mentioned, which is the major regional wastewater and stormwater agency that many of these cities are part of. Again, helps keep those rates lower for those cities that are part of that major regional system. And it's the smaller cities and the independent cities that have to manage their own stormwater that are on the upper end of the bill increase. Okay, last but not least, we have the transportation utility fee. The TUF, as we call it, is unlike water, sewer, stormwater rates which go to fund operation and maintenance costs, a diversity of costs, including operating and capital. The TUF is dedicated to a specific purpose, and that is pavement maintenance and preservation. And that generates about $1.45 million currently. There are many other costs associated with the transportation system, but the TUF that are funded by other revenues, the TUF is specific to the pavement maintenance component. The next slide. When this was adopted in about 2017, the city code indicates that the TUF can be increased for any number of factors as shown here. It's based on a cost of service adjustment where it's determined that the revenue needs to increase to maintain the transportation pavement facilities. An inflationary index such as the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index for Seattle, which is named as kind of the estimate of inflation for the TUF, and then other adjustments for changes in road conditions or other revenue sources. Next slide. The recommended single-family monthly rates and revenue are shown here. The single-family rate currently is $6.86. The projected increase needed to basically keep pace with inflation as it is experienced in the transportation world is 4% per year. For many years after the transportation fee was implemented, there was no increase at all. So the city lost significant ground in that rate by not increasing the rates in the first few years. So there was a significant increase 2 years ago to try to rebalance and capture some of that lost purchasing power. When we compared the rates to the inflation, the cumulative inflation, there was still about a 10% gap, but the rate increase is significantly lower in this period, the 4% per year rate increase, as opposed to what it was in the prior 2 years. Next slide. Oh, so the rates for non-residential customers or other residential and commercial industrial customers are shown here. And it really, there's about 5 different classes for non-residential and 4 or 5 other classes for of different types of residential customers. The rate structure is intended to both reflect the intensity of use of the transportation system. So Class 1 non-residential has a lower rate than Class 2 because the types of uses within Class 1, the industrial, warehouse, have lower trip generation, means they utilize the street system less per unit of in this case, it's square footage of the building, than an office or a medical or retail supermarket. You can see as you go up in the rate, it's because those different types of customers generate a lot more trips on the system. And so under a cost of service framework, they're going to pay more.
I have a quick question on that.
Yeah.
So this is being evaluated on a trips basis, not necessarily like a vehicle weight issue, because I would
That's correct.
argue that like industrial warehouse, we have lots of trucks coming in. And although they may not be tripping as much, the wear on those roads, I would suspect, is at a higher rate with heavier vehicles, correct?
Yeah, and that was looked at so when the rate structure was first developed and it involved a specific committee that was formed to evaluate all of those types of issues to come up with a fair and equitable defensible rate structure, they considered all sorts of different issues like the truck trips. Part of the issue with the truck trips is there's still not good data on what the, frequency of truck trips are for different types of uses. And so, what was developed and reflected here is a trip generation based approach, which is the most common approach. That's not to say that in the future, certainly as additional information, data, surveys become more robust and available, that could not be, that can be changed. The committee meets every couple of years. You can always look to make changes later. Yeah.
And in fact, if we did look at this one, I'd be really in favor of a super high EV charge. So anyone who has an electric vehicle who's currently getting a free ride in the state sense would have to pay through the nose. And I think that would be very fair.
I have a comment. There's not a free ride. They pay more for registration fees than gas engines, cars. So it's not a free ride.
Can I ask my recurring question? Multifamily 4.63, is that per multifamily unit?
Yes, that is, so the units of measure, in this case, DU means dwelling unit on the far right-hand corner. So you are exactly correct that multifamily customers pay $4.63 per dwelling unit. So if you've got 100 units as part of your, you pay 100 times that. Yep.
I have another question. How does the city budget or deal with other transportation issues rather than just the pavement maintenance? For example, new roadways that need to be installed, our share of costs of the parkway, those kind of things. And also the 10-year plan and that kind of stuff.
So I'll take those one at a time. So first of all, with regard to the parkway, we took out a very, very long-term piece of debt, which we're going to be paying on for a very, very long time. And so that's paying a small portion of an intercities fund that was designed to match some state funds so as to move the bypass project forward. So that's funded through a debt mechanism. And all of the cities got together to try to do that, hopefully to make the bypass happen quicker. The second thing is, with regard to more conventional funding, we do get pass-through revenue for things like gasoline tax, and indeed perhaps the higher registration fees that EV people pay might be part of that. So I definitely stand corrected on that one. But the thing about that is that allows the city approximately once a decade to do one really massive construction project without adding on extra debt. So for example, an Elliott Road or a River Street, those things will come along once a decade, and that is what that will cover. The reason why this TUF was instituted was because it was recognized that our street quality was steadily going down because there was not enough of these other revenue sources like gasoline tax in order to offset that regular road construction.
Just to go back to my particular pet project, what would be the rationale for having a lower multifamily unit rate than a single family dwelling? I mean, one would think that the transport costs associated would be virtually the same.
Based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual, which was used to calibrate the rates, the relative rates for the different classes and types of residential housing, a typical multifamily, and we're talking about vehicle trips here, a typical multifamily house, a dwelling unit generates just, fewer trips. And so the rate reflects that. I think that plays out too when we look at average occupants per unit. Multifamily tends to have fewer people per unit. The units tend to be smaller. So That's the rationale. Okay, last slide for transportation shows the bill comparison for cities that have a tough or other kind of pavement preservation type fee. Not all cities do, but for those that are part of our surveyed communities, Newburgh's fee is second to the lowest, down about what, just over 650, which Sherwood had the lowest at 657. There's quite a range of fees. And again, part of this, again, was because there was no inflationary increase for a few years. All right, just.
So before we move on, how do other municipalities pay for pavement repairs and things of that nature? Well, I know we talked about the red light camera being a potential revenue mechanism, although that's going into the general fund. We've had some discussions regarding gas taxes, which I know cities like, I think Tigard has one. I don't know if there's any other municipalities around us, but what are some of the revenue mechanisms for other cities beyond the ones listed here?
So some of them have a reliance on radar enforcement programs. Others have a 1 or 2 or more cent local gasoline tax, which they utilize in order to not have to have something like TUF. Then there are other classes of cities that are very inefficiently run that just have come to accept that you're going to pay $6,000 or $7,000 of property tax and also live on a gravel street forever. So there's all of those options, depending on whether you're in Portland or somewhere else.
But there are a lot of cities that are looking at or in the process of developing these fees because of the constraints and so we'll be seeing more, I'm sure, in the future.
So I should mention that, and I'm not saying this is going to happen because this would be a major piece of council consideration. If we had a 2 cents local gasoline tax, our estimates are it would be generating something like $300,000 to $350,000 a year would be what that would create, which could offset TUF rates to some extent. But I'm not sure if that's palatable to, the folks on council and the community.
The last couple of slides just combine everything together to look at the bill impacts associated with the individual system rate increases. And as I mentioned, water is based on a 5% per year increase, sewer 4.1%, and storm 4.5%. Finally, TUF at about 4%. So you can see the current bill is about $181.87. That includes a public safety fee that is also part of the utility services statement and the communication officer fee. Those fees weren't developed or reviewed as part of this process, but they appear on the bill. So for completeness, we include those in the bill comparison. The communication officer part of the bill is going to go away next year because that debt will be paid off. So that is a $2.78 or $2.78 reduction, offset, of course, by the rate increases for the other systems for both. So for January 1st of 2027, taking all that combined would be a bill increase. And this is for a typical residential customer that uses 700 cubic feet of water per month and winter average water use of 500 units, and then pays one TUF and one stormwater bill. So the monthly increase would be $5.12 for that customer compared to the current monthly bill. In 2028, we don't have the reduction, the $2.78 reduction that's offsetting part of the increase. So that increase in 2028 would be $8.26. That is a 4.4% overall increase in 2028 and 2.8% increase in 2027. Final slide just shows the bill comparison when you pull, actually, I guess it's not the final slide, but almost. This is the total bill comparison. The different colors represent the different systems. And the placement of the bill here really reflects the, you know, a large portion of the bill is the wastewater or the sewer bill. And that's why the Newburgh bill is, you know, included on the upper end of the comparison. And again, not everybody charges a TUF, the transportation utility fee. This doesn't also include the gas taxes, you know, those local gas taxes. So it's not a apples to apples comparison when you consider that some people fund transportation through other mechanisms that aren't captured in this bill. So this is just looking at the utility service statements. Yeah, so that's that slide. And then if you go to the next slide, though, the flip side of that is looking at the property tax bill of a typical single family home with about, do you want to say something?
Okay, Katie was just asking me to talk about the 3% on property taxes.
Oh, okay. This chart is a comparison of the tax bill of a residential property with a $550,000 value. And here, Newburgh is on the lower end of the bill. So again, it's, you know, different communities make different decisions about how to fund certain items. And some of them will have general obligation bonds to fund a portion of infrastructure or levies that fund maintenance or things. And so that, you know, versus other communities who put those on the utility services statement. So taken all together is the impact on a residential or a customer of any type. So on the upper end of the service statement, but on the lower end of the property tax bill. And you wanted to say something on that?
And the other thing to keep in mind here is that we actually have the capability here to do an additional 3% property tax increase if we feel that we really need it and if the council and community want us to. And as well as having paid off a piece of debt early, which produced that roughly $3 reduction, we're also skipping the 3% additional property tax increase. So you're going to see us stay at the lower end of the property tax scale. And so we're doing the best that we can do to try to keep the rates down generally. We still have 150 odd FTEs. Our competitors have 170. They have extra administrative staff. They have assistant city managers, and they work a lot less than we do.
And just a question on this property tax bill. So for example, in Newburgh, we have bonds for pools and other TVF&R and things of that nature. Is that considering this, or is just, so that's indicative of a Newburgh home that has all of those requirements? This isn't an apples to apples chart to say like, here's what we're getting for like services across the various municipalities, correct? So you got to pay somewhere, right? And in some municipalities, they're paying through property tax. And if you look at us, we're primarily probably paying through a direct bill system through the actual services, correct? That's what we're trying to demonstrate here? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are some communities that have chosen to do it the other way. I think a lot of, if those were voter things, they would probably fail here. And then what would happen is we would have broken systems, and then the state would come in and tell us to build them anyway. And at that point, they would cost a lot more. So it's better to save up reserves and pay for things as you must.
I've had this explained to me, but I think I probably didn't understand it well. McMinnville has their internal Mac Water and Light. And I'm seeing them at the bottom end of both of these graphs, both the utility bill and the property tax bill. What is how is that so much more advantageous to the residents of McMinnville?
I'll do the Mac bashing first, and then the science will come in. If you have the providence and the luxury to inherit hundreds of acres of prime timberland that you can collect and sell, and if the good Lord has given you a reservoir at the top of a hill so that you can water feed your whole city, so you don't have to build pump stations everywhere, then you're a lucky person. And you would think that with all of those advantages, your budget must be really well balanced and everything must be going well. Well, sometimes folks don't take advantage of what Providence has given them.
And that's an excellent explanation of the water system. I will say for the wastewater system, I did their rates when they did a master plan a couple of decades ago, and they had the highest sewer rates, one of the highest sewer rates in the state. And through a lot of, difficult decisions and rate increases early on, they went to cash funding. And now they have among the lower rates of the cities. So it's been a incredible transformation. They also don't have a stormwater charge right now. They are, going to need to, because of state permitting requirements, most likely need to do something to address those needs. So that'll be coming later. So it just depends too on the regulatory requirements facing the local jurisdiction.
They also have a city tax, which I don't think was included in this, but they have a city tax that's, I think it's $13 or $14 a month.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, I think I have one final slide, just looking into the future as we do. The fact that the city does this every 2 years allows for incremental adjustments to the rates that otherwise would not be the case when you have a dynamic environment of inflation, and at least we certainly have had in recent years, and also the capital improvements. So the things that have contributed to and will continue to contribute to mitigating rate increases are steady customer growth, because as you add more people to the system and increase the rate base, it's not a direct one-for-one correlation to an increase in costs. You can accommodate additional growth and without operation and maintenance costs increasing at the same rate. So that is a benefit to the system, plus systems development charges are generated. The city has been very proactive in managing debt, not taking on new debt, except in the cases where it's absolutely necessary. And in fact, a portion of the existing debt does drop off. And of course, as we've really highlighted, utilizing the reserves that have been accumulating for capital improvements in this planning period. That's good news for the short term, but something to watch for the longer term. Obviously, one of the big assumptions here for the water system is that the property tax bond will support the majority of that new plant costs. If that's not the case, then that's upward pressure on the projected water rate increases. These are heavily, the capital improvements are really expensive and a big part of the cost of these systems. There's going to need to be continued investment in repair, replacement, regulatory, all of those sorts of things. Inflation will continue to put pressure on the costs, and any kind of slowdown in customer growth or economic activity will also potentially impact the need for rate increases. But overall, the rate increases themselves, while some of the bills are, higher than average in the community comparison, the projected increases, I would say, are lower than many of the communities that are in our rate comparison. The next steps are city council meeting next week. Do you want to say any final?
So for the rest of this process, so this will be the last night, hopefully, that the committee meets. So what's left on the agenda is to hear the public comments. And then the committee will have a discussion about the rates that have been presented. And then hopefully make a recommendation that we as city staff will take to city council and make a presentation on the rates that are proposed here. And then city council will then vote on an official rate increase based on the recommendation from this committee.
Okay, so at this point, I'll now open to the floor to public comment. Okay. Natalie, did we receive any public comments on this?
Yes, we did. We will start with Jim Talt.
Jim Tolt speaking. I'm a Newburgh resident. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for the excellent presentation that actually answered all of my questions. However, because I'm at this table, I thought I'd go ahead and give some feedback on the presentation. By the way, my presentation, or what I saw on the city website that was part of the package, also included a bunch of information about planned road improvements and stuff. I don't know if you all saw that. But anyway, as far as feedback, and again, I found that really helpful, and it did answer all my questions, but there was one item in particular that really got my interest. And could we see again slide number 20? Yeah, right there, that one right there. This one got my interest. And again, this is just feedback, but I want to point out a few things about this slide, at least some observations that I think are correct. If you look over here, can you show me the top of the slide just a little bit? No, the other way. There you go. Right there. The slide is titled 5-Year Capital Plan. But how many years do we have here? It's a 5-year capital, it's titled 5-Year Capital Plan, but what we see here are 6 years. And it shows us an inflated total here of $6 million. And then it shows these numbers here that are supposed to roll up into this $6 million. But these numbers here do not roll up into the $6 million. They don't add up to $6 million. And the $6 million number is not a 5-year number, and it's not even this 6-year number. The $6 million actually, I believe, is probably more like the 10-year number. And so, honestly, I spent about 2 hours on this trying to figure out what was going on here. And I just wanted to give you that honest feedback that I found it very confusing. And one of the reasons that these numbers here don't roll up properly to the $6 million is because these two entries here of 525,000, well, they should be totaled over here and they're not. And the other reason is that some of these values have no inflationary adjustment, even though they have at least one or more inflationary cycles. And an example I might give you, the easiest one is, well, this one right here. Right here is potentially an inflationary adjustment of 3 to 4%, depending on what you think is going to happen, and it's not reflected over here. And the same is true here at 350,000. Here's an inflationary adjustment, and it's not getting anything. And then, of course, these numbers here are not there. Anyway, so despite the excellent thing, I spent 2 hours on this trying to figure out what is going on here. So that's just some feedback. And I also wanted to note that if you go to slide number 14, I think it is. Yes, right there. It's the other version of this. The other thing that really caused me some grief was these values here add up to $900,000 or $900,000, not $1.2 million. And I thought, well, why is that? Well, I think the reason is because this center column here is actually 3 years. It's not 1 year. And I'm imagining that was done because this thing wouldn't fit on the page. So someone decided, well, we'll just group them together here. But really, this ought to be $450,000 so that this all totals fine here. And again, these numbers here don't quite make it there, but that was my feedback. The other part of my feedback is that, and it's not in this presentation, but I found it very helpful in the city package to be able to see all the details of the planned road improvements. And it was really, I felt really good about that because I saw a lot of road improvement work planned. And I was glad to see that. I was also glad to see that a lot of it's in the central district and south districts, which have been long neglected. And so anyway, I was very happy to see that. And it was also very helpful to see where Newburgh stands relative to all the other cities. That's really useful and again, helpful. So that's it for me. And again, thank you very much. And maybe you could talk to someone about making those slides a little more. Oh, and one last thing, the slide, neither one of them show what the inflation rates are that are being used. So you can't tell how it's being escalated. And that would be helpful to have too. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you. Do we have other comments?
Yes, we have Robert Soap. Soppy. Okay, sorry about that.
Good evening. My name is Robert Suppy, and thank you all. I've had to rewrite this because of the presentation, so I may be a little less organized than usual. I have read through all the previous presentations. I haven't listened or watched all the videos. One question that I've had in the past that I've never really sorted out, nothing in here showed me how it was determined how much should be paid for by fixed rates versus variable rates. I know in the past when I've dug into it, there was just an assumption of a percentage. It seems to me, and I don't know how it was done here because again, I couldn't find it in what I read. It seems to me that those things ought to actually be calculated. We have fixed expenses to provide water and sewer services, and it seems to me the rates ought to reflect that. Whatever the fixed is, that's what we ought to be recovering with fixed rates, and whatever the variable is. Maybe that's how it was done, but again, I couldn't find it from what I read. Just a side note, I know every city is different in how they do things and what it costs them, and I understand very well how McMinnville on water is very different, and they have a huge advantage. But somebody had pointed out to me something about Beaverton's sewer bill, and I looked them up. The base rate between us and Beaverton, they're slightly higher, basically $34 or $39 versus our $34. But their usage rate is 1/4 of what Newburgh's is. Now, my only comment is, an obvious question is, what are they doing different? I'm not sure with sewers how you get an advantage where you can do it cheaper. I understand with water, that's a thing. And I'm not saying we're getting it wrong. It's just, that's something that if I were in your shoes, I'd want to know what that was. SDCs have always been a big thing for me in Newburgh. The capital improvement project tables were very useful, but I think they would be more so if they broke down what is expected to be paid for by rates and what will be expected to be paid for by SDCs. What else? Oh, just one thing, and I think this has been traditional, but I've not thought of it before. For water, we provide to people outside the city. We charge them 150% of what you get charged in the city for usage. But sewer's the same. Now, I assume there aren't many sewer customers outside the city, but that just seemed odd to me. Oh, very important one, the water bond. I was not real comfortable with what I heard about how we are going to be backed into this corner that we have to approve a water bond or we're going to be in deep trouble. In one of the presentations, there was a separate measure that was considered, which was having instead of a property tax, a revenue secured bond. I don't know where the discussion went with that. I noticed nothing was mentioned about it here. Maybe there's a good reason not to consider that, but that to me seems a lot more appropriate. With a property tax bond, you're paying for the water plant based on the value of your property. With a revenue-based bond, you're paying for it based on what you're using. That seems to me to be a fairer way to do it. I was going to make a bunch of comments on the chart about the property tax rates. In the past, every time I've seen them in Newburgh, they have been very selective and have only represented the city, the one single tax rate. And I've always complained that that's comparing apples to oranges. I wanted to commend whoever did this. As I heard tonight, no, this seems to be pretty comprehensive. I've never seen that before in Newburgh. And I've always complained about it because, come on, if you don't add all those pieces in, they don't mean anything. That, sewer rates, water rates, that. And I think that's everything I've got. Thank you.
Those are all the comments for today.
From there, I'll now close the public hearing on the rate review town hall. And from here, we go into committee recommendations. And what are the recommendations from the staff?
So the staff recommendations for 2027 and 2028 are a 5% increase for water for both years, a 4.1% increase for both years for sewer, a 4.5% increase for both years for stormwater, and a 4% increase for both years for the transportation utility fee.
Okay, so from there, discussion time. As far as committee members and what you think of those rates, perhaps leading up to a motion. But discussions first? From anyone? The silence is deafening.
Stop.
Okay, Roger?
Sure. This is my first year on this committee, and I appreciate all the work and explanation that went into the presentations. And I think it was very, very well thought out and very well explained. And when questions did come up, they were well answered. And but I do have a question about when is the city planning on looking at things that came up about the rate structures? I think you mentioned this was done a few years ago, and is that anticipated that will be done again 2 years, 4 years? Is there any expectation on that?
No, I think this was the question about that also Mr. Suppi brought up about the fixed versus the volume. And you're absolutely correct. That was not part of the scope of the committee this year to look at. It was a much more condensed process, 4 meetings instead of 8 to 10. And what's that?
As was requested?
As was requested, yeah. So generally, communities will do a more comprehensive look every, 5 years or so. In your case, you do things every 2 years, so it would make sense perhaps to consider that next time around. But it does add to the time commitment of the committee and certainly the costs for the city to look into that. But it's really a policy decision. And so in this case, the rate increases are assumed to be applied across the board without changes to the rate structure.
I would ask, however, if the committee members have a thing that they've seen that they would like to see as a change to the model, please don't be shy about it. Follow Mr. Suppy's example and send me an email listing what you think might be a good change. And if we see that there's some thoughts or patterns, or from anyone in the audience or anyone listening at home that would like to see a change, we could easily calibrate a session to look at the model, how we do it. We have the time before the next time we do this.
That said, Deb, can you go back and just cover the approach? Because as I understand it, having, I think it's number 4 for me, is that we follow kind of a standard approach methodology that's utilized not just in Oregon, but across the US.
Correct. Yeah. So fixed and variable components. So when we looked at the rate structures for the different systems, we said, you know, there's a service charge, that's the fixed component. And then there's a volumetric component. For storm and transportation fee, those are all fixed. It's just 100% fixed. For water and sewer, there's a portion of the bill that is based on the fixed charge and a portion that's based on the volume charge. The rule of thumb in the industry is that more than 80% of the costs in any given, you know, year or even potentially longer are fixed, because debt service, personnel costs, those don't fluctuate with water use. There are some things like power, some chemicals that will fluctuate as the volume that's either consumed or discharged changes, but the majority of the costs are fixed. And so, but most communities do not charge 80 or 90% of the, you know, the rates through the fixed charge, because that would be counter to other objectives of the community, like affordability for small users, conservation incentives, those sorts of things. And so, and fairness viewed from the lens of the more you use, the more you pay. So it's a balance. Rate design is a balance, and of all the various objectives. And in prior processes, what we have done, you know, there has been a movement, as Ron said, in terms of what is an appropriate balance, particularly that conservation piece. Because as Will said, you know, conservation will save you money in the long term because you don't have to replace the plant and other infrastructure as quickly. If we can keep the peak demand below a certain level, that helps defer when that big plant needs to be upgraded. And so what's a balance there? So in California, where there's actually state mandates, surprise, there are other states where there are mandates about charging, you know, incentivizing conservation because of the acute water shortages that many of the communities there face. They have said that an appropriate balance is about 40% or even up to 50% of revenue recovered through the fixed charge, which still leaves 50 or 60% of the revenue recovered through the volume charges, which still are providing a significant price signal to consumers that, you know, you can save money by using less, and, you know, there's a cost to your continued consumption, and that cost increases. So that is what we have generally targeted, is somewhere that percentage used to be kind of the 30 to 40%. So that's where Newburgh is right now with the water and sewer rates, somewhere between 30 and 40% of the total revenue recovered through the fixed charge and the remaining through the volume charge. And it reflects both kind of cost of service that, you know, certain costs like customer service and meter replacement and, you know, those sorts of things, the capacity in the system that's related to fire flows, those aren't variable costs. Those are fixed costs, and those are recovered through those. The portion of the infiltration and inflow costs that's not the result of customers discharging, that's leaky pipes. So that's partly how that fixed charge gets built up to that 30 to 40%. And so that's the, yeah, so it definitely follows standard industry practice, an evaluation of the factors that contribute to the cost of service, and balancing all the various objectives that go into rate making. And so prior committees have helped to inform how to strike that balance, and still, you know, but, and that's not something that's generally tweaked with every year. It's not necessary because those factors don't change. You know, we're always going to be below the 80% fixed from a financial standpoint. So it's just a matter of what is right for the community, and you know, the issues that are that you're facing within the planning period. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. We want dialogue. Let's talk through the specifics. Again, this is my fourth rate review. So that means I started before the pandemic, which means that we had the thing on the topic was the pandemic hit, people lost jobs, and it was economic challenges for many people in our community. And the question is, what do you do with that? And the answer was difficult. The first part is you want utilities to run. You want what you have, the sewer, the water, the stormwater, roads, you want those to be available for the community, period. We have, this committee over a couple of sessions ago, have addressed that the economic relief that's offered by the city is fully utilized. It wasn't in the past, before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, we've actually been utilizing that. It's one of the things we checked on, I checked on. So that individuals who have lost or changed their economics, I got laid off this year, so that was fun. People who have single or fixed incomes have to do that challenge. That said, what's available is being utilized, it's available, and you still want things to go off and run, and you still have inflationary costs to deal with. It's just a monster you have to deal with. And so we do not want to increase costs. We want to manage that stringently. I would say in the city of Newburgh, sorry, well, I'm going to be complimentary. We have a city manager that has saved us millions of dollars. He's very cost conscientious. That's great, right? That's what you want out of your city government, is to be very efficient. This is leading into a proposal for, if there's not any more discussion, I do move that we go forward with the city's recommendation.
Do we need to be more specific as a motion? Just a second on that.
Katie was wonderful. She did a great job. Please.
Okay, so is there someone else to second the motion to accept the recommendations?
I was hoping for, could we know what the increase was this last biennium? I know we've seen that in the month to months, but we haven't, I didn't see it anywhere here. Just what's compared.
Yeah, so it was these numbers.
So last, for the 25-26 biennium, we raised at these same rates. I thought the sewer was 3.5.
So going off my memory here, water was 5%, sewer was 6.5%.
No, I think it was 3.
Oh, 3.5%.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Stormwater was 6.5%, and the tough was 4%.
Well, except it was 17% the first year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so-
yes.
So when we did this 2 years ago, we were running up against accounts that we didn't raise rates for a couple years. And then in order to meet the demands, and we were also having the headwinds of the extraordinary inflation that was incorporated as part of that, we had to have the discussion of like, how do we play catch up with those rates that we made relatively static for several years. So that's why you'll see a 17% increase there. It's really just address, and I think that was transportation as well, correct? So it was of the accounts it sounds quite stringent, but then when you look at the overall total bill, with stormwater being the largest component of that, then it didn't make a significant change in the overall bottom line of that. But we were also 2 years ago dealing with coming out of the pandemic. That's when we learned the water treatment plant was going to be gobs and gobs more money than we anticipated. So those rates were a little bit more, I would say a little bit more in flux, and I think we've sort of settled down a little bit in terms of inflationary components associated with kind of what we're seeing in general market.
Could I also ask, we're anticipating that when the communications officer fee drops off the bill, households will see a small reduction. Is there any appetite in the city council to replace that with some other line?
Not whatsoever.
No, so that was that's been a council goal. Was a lot of the councilors have ran on a platform that they wanted to reduce the water bill. And so Will had came up with this debt reduction plan. So we're being able to pay off our debt early because we've added some new revenue. We have the red light camera. We sold the Butler property. So it was just some one-time revenue that we're using to pay off this debt. And then we're able to take off a line from the billing statement because of that exchange.
But strategically, my hope is that we will continue to work on debt reduction, and we'll get this is an early win, and we'll try to get that big piece of debt that's in the wastewater model. That's the next target. So if we can make extra revenue, we should keep banking some aside to get rid of that. That would be my suggestion to council.
Obviously, what we're doing here is much more about governance than about politics. But if several of the city council members have specifically stated that their goal is to reduce the utility bills that people are seeing each month, will they be pleased to see this kind of recommendation?
So I think they're glad to see that we've stabilized our problems sufficiently to not take the extra 3% property tax. That's pretty huge. Some people in the community think we should never take that 3%. That's people who aren't really looking at our labor costs. So they like that. They like that we've got a piece off of the billing statement, which we pledged we would do. They're going to see these increases and see that they are in line with market forces. I think it will be okay. I hope that we can continue to try to work on more debt reduction. It is my belief that if we can get the wastewater debt retired early, as we've retired a couple of other bits of debt early, then in the year that comes off, then that will have a very positive effect on that rate for that year.
Okay, and then as Ron mentioned, and I thought maybe we would be talking about this quite a bit more, but the financial assistance for utilities, I have roughly 1 million questions about that whole system that are not appropriate for tonight, but I'll send Will a very long email. I do, yeah, but I have personal reservations about using private entities to do charity work on behalf of, basically, I think the city should probably have the whole program in-house or have some maybe more oversight of it. But that's just a personal perspective on it. But I would ask, like, when was the last time that there was like financial audit or kind of a review of the procedures that those partners are using to determine eligibility and that kind of thing?
I will comment on the reason that we give it to other entities is to avoid any sort of favoritism that the city might show to one individual or another. That's why we ask that we send it to other entities and they have their own screening processes and their own distribution methods. And that way it's not us showing preferential treatment for why did you pay all of this person's bill, but then you only gave this person, that way it's out of our hands. And that was the whole entire reasoning behind giving it to other entities. And then sorry, what was your other part of your question?
Review.
Oh. Yeah, we usually, maybe you can help me with some of that. Because they usually have a pretty close interaction with us, so they don't give away any of the money without checking with us. And so we have a ledger that we keep on the money that's given to each entity, and then we know which checks are dispersed and who they've been dispersed to. And so it's not a whole lot of money, so it's pretty easy to keep track of on that. And like I said, we don't get involved in their track, like how they disperse the money. So if they have their own methods on that, we don't get involved on that.
And the other thing is, if the city did lean out of co-production in terms of these sorts of things, for example, if there was no NDC, we would have to have one FTE added to our ledger, and that person would have to work on tourism promotion downtown. If we had to bring this in-house, I would have to hire an FTE to be a community grants organizer, and I'm under clear directives not to add any staff.
Yeah, the only part of that process that we do in-house is the military and low income applications. And those are first come, first served basis when we open up the applications. And it's pretty black and white. The military, you just have to submit your, what is it, DD
214.
DD 214. And then the low income, we just have, you know, certain things that qualify you and you just show support for that. So it's pretty simple on that.
Would it be, I mean, just in terms of procedures for partners who are distributing these funds, would it be as simple to have them use a similar application form for low income to just to show consistency and verification that the people who are receiving this assistance are in need and have been, you know, vetted to some extent?
Yeah.
Again, these are like
Yeah.
bigger questions than we're going to solve in the next.
Yeah,
10
I'm
minutes,
happy to
but-
talk offline on
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
program. Yeah, like I said, we don't usually monitor how they choose to disperse the funds on that. You know, we just say we have these that you can give to people who are in need. When we have people who call and they're unable to pay a bill, we say, here's a list of people of nonprofits and churches that you can contact that have our funds. Please contact them for assistance.
And the positive thing is, as you notice from our immediately jumping on the billing statement change, we are open to process improvement and open to suggestions. And certainly we will seriously look at that idea.
Yeah. Is that in terms of a budget line item, is it a fixed number or is it a percentage of overall?
It's been a fixed number, and that was a council resolution that set that fixed number.
Okay. And then last point on this, is there any coordination with like the counselors at the local schools who are quite engaged with families who are very much in need?
I don't believe so. Most of our outreach is churches and the Whitecap who apply for the funds, and any other nonprofit who applies for the funds. And then most of the outreach comes from if somebody calls and they're unable to pay their bill or they're going to be shut off, we send them to these resources.
Yeah.
The only time I can think of when we did have a school connector was the Lutheran Charities have told us about a couple of families, but they're not the school district, but they're school district adjacent.
Okay. If I'm still on this committee in 2 years, I'll have a lot more questions. And then the other thing, the other thing I was just going to ask about, in terms of, we talked a little bit about this with regards to the TUF, but fines and fees for non-compliance and things like that. Is being more punitive, would that move the ticker at all in terms of generating income?
I don't know. I know that Officer Winter currently has 14 sidewalk cases on his ledger. He just told me recently. I know that they tend to resolve themselves and we don't end up putting liens on people's properties. But I can't say how much of that carrot and stick is doing what exactly.
Okay, well then, I'll end my grandstanding by seconding Ron's motion to accept the.
Small grandstanding.
the city-
They're all good
city
questions.
staff
Thank
recommendation.
All right, so it has been moved and seconded, thank you, to accept the staff recommendations on these specific increases. Any further discussion before we take a vote? Okay, Natalie?
The only question I have,
Sure, sorry.
is there anything on the horizon that any of our local legislators have made us aware of, similar to HB 2001, that we should be aware of as we set these rates?
I think now that I'm more intimately involved with engineering, the next one that comes up will defy them, and we'll choose to spend the legal fees to fight the state, and we'll form a class action with other cities, which is my plan. By the way, I'm not being funny, Derek. The next time we have something like this put upon us, now that I'm much more involved in the process, I can see Newburgh being the tip of the spear on an effort to resist another unfunded mandate like that.
Well, I just remember sitting in the seat 2 years ago and like all of the dollars were going to state mandated requirements that I'm sure there was some benefit to the system, but a lot of it was we were checking boxes to meet requirements for state regulatory issues. So,
The state doesn't usually give us much of a heads up.
no, I'm
So-
aware of that as well. And that probably was part of the reason for some of the additional percentages that we took a look at last time, but no, so that's it. That's the only question I heard.
We have a good local senator nearby who's spoiling for a fight, and I can expect that we would be willing to be the people fighting that fight if something else like this does come out. And I'm serious about that. There has to come a point where the state figures out how to give cities money if it's going to keep asking for new chemicals or new things to be processed. Even if the intentions are very good, we have to pay for these things somehow.
Any other discussion? I think we're to the point of a roll call vote. Natalie?
Yes. Okay, so we know Derek Wharf is absent, so then we have Enid Burkle. Is it a yes or a no? Then Mary Meyer, Leisha Adams,
Yes.
Derek Duff,
Yes.
Ned Knight, Ron Sinicki, Roger Coleman,
Yes.
and then Raquel Peregrino de Brito is absent.
And let the record reflect that the motion passes unanimously. All right, any other discussion?
I'll just note that the council meeting, there's going to be 2 council meetings. The first one is an informational only session for the rates to be presented. So it'll be a very similar presentation to what you received tonight. That will go to council with these rates that are that you just voted yes to. And then there will be a second public hearing on, I think it's March 16th. Okay. And then that will be the official council vote for these rates.
I do want to share my appreciation of Deb's analysis. 4 sessions ago, I came in with the attitude of why the heck is this city paying for somebody that we should be able to do in-house? I have a technical background, and so I'm going, well, gosh, I expect my city to figure that out. And what I think the public comment hits it on the head as far as the analysis is thorough and detailed, and what it gives is a benchmarking data point, which is what you want. You want to know how we compare and why, and that's the questions, and what are the standards for industry and why? And we can go into much more details, which please ask. They'll give it to you. We've done it in the past. But again, thank you. Thank you for all the city comments and stuff and all the support. And I do appreciate the brevity of the meetings.
The only point, we received some really great public comment in terms of the presentation, if we can get that updated. The only other thing that would be really nice to know is for some of these municipalities that are on regional systems, that maybe do well to kind of point that out to understand maybe why some of those locations. I think that would help answer some of the questions as well. So if you have 5 or 6 municipalities that are joining together as part of a regional system, obviously there's going to be some pretty significant economies of scale there, especially as it relates to overhead costs. So I think that would be something, if we're able to do that, to kind of draw attention to that, to help kind of understand some of the context there.
Yeah, just second that, even just like an asterisk or something to say, these are not one-to-one, not apples to apples. And I just also wanted to say thank you for educating me on on these things. This has been really a great experience, and I appreciate your transparency and willingness to dive into the weeds on any and all matters. And also thank you to fellow committee members. It's been great to serve with you.
Anyone else? Yes.
I would like to say it would be pretty helpful to see on those bar graphs which of the cities are in parts of those like intercity systems and which ones aren't, because that would be really nice to have that kind of perspective as to, which ones. I want to know if there are any outliers to those and what those are doing differently than other cities that are independent.
Any other comments or discussion? Well, if not, the Rate Review Committee meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much for coming tonight.